What happened on live television wasn't supposed to matter. It was meant to be another controlled exchange, another carefully worded appearance where the facts stayed safely abstract and responsibility stayed comfortably distant. But then Thomas Massie did something deceptively simple. He named the place. Not the official phrasing, not the sanitized description that had been repeated for years. He called Jeffrey Epstein's detention facility what it actually functioned as, a luxury prison camp in everything but name. And in that moment, the entire narrative shifted. Because once something is named correctly, it can no longer hide behind ambiguity. The language that had protected the story for years suddenly became its greatest weakness. For a long time, the public had been told a very specific version of events. Epstein, one of the most high-profile detainees in modern history, was supposedly held under the strictest conditions available. A maximum security federal facility, constant monitoring, no room for error, a place where failure was not an option. That framing wasn't accidental, it was essential. Because if the prison was secure, then the outcome could be framed as an anomaly, a tragic malfunction, a freak convergence of unlikely mistakes. But Massie's statement didn't allow for that comfort anymore. By pointing out the reality of the conditions, the privileges, the lapses, the exceptions, he forced a comparison that officials were never prepared to defend. And the reaction said everything. There was no immediate rebuttal grounded in facts, no clean explanation. Instead, the response drifted. Language became softer, terms became broader. The conversation shifted from specifics to generalities. That's when the lie began to unravel, not because someone confessed, but because the defense suddenly required too much explanation. Within 90 seconds, the audience watching at home could see it happening in real time. When officials insist something was secure, but can't explain why cameras failed, guards slept, logs were incomplete, and oversight vanished simultaneously, the word secure loses all meaning. It becomes a placeholder, not a description. What made this moment explosive wasn't confrontation, it was contrast. Massie didn't accuse anyone directly. He didn't speculate. He didn't dramatize. He simply placed the official story next to observable reality and let the distance between them speak. And that distance was enormous. If Epstein was truly under constant supervision, then safeguards didn't just fail, they didn't exist. And if safeguards didn't exist, then the system wasn't negligent, it was permissive. That distinction changes everything. Negligence implies accident. Permission implies design. As officials scrambled to regain control of the narrative, they leaned on process, on policy, on internal reviews. But process only works when people believe it applies equally. And the public had already watched that belief collapse. Because if 3 low-level employees can be blamed, terminated, and erased from the story while no one higher up faces consequences, then accountability isn't enforced, it's negotiated. And that realization is far more damaging than any single failure. It tells people exactly how power operates when no one thinks they're being watched closely enough. The most revealing part of the exchange wasn't what was said next, but what wasn't. There was no clear answer to a basic question. How does someone under supposedly maximum security supervision experience every single layer of failure at once? Cameras don't all break independently. Guards don't all fall asleep coincidentally. Protocols don't all become unclear at the same moment unless they were never truly enforced to begin with. Each excuse required another exception. Each clarification raised another contradiction. And with every attempt to explain, the story grew weaker. This is why moments like this are dangerous to institutions. Not because they expose corruption outright, but because they expose inconsistency. And inconsistency is where credibility dies. The public doesn't expect perfection, but it does expect honesty. When the same system that demands absolute compliance from ordinary people suddenly relies on vagueness and technicalities to protect itself, trust evaporates. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily, one unanswered question at a time. The 3 employees who were blamed will likely never recover their careers. Their names will fade from memory. Their lives will move on in obscurity. But the precedent set in moments like this doesn't fade. It teaches everyone watching exactly where responsibility stops. It draws a line and makes it clear who stands above it. And once people see that line, they can't unsee it. Because power doesn't fear opposition nearly as much as it fears scrutiny. Opposition can be dismissed. Scrutiny demands consistency. In the end, history won't remember the hearing for raised voices or dramatic exchanges. It will remember it as another quiet moment when the system was tested, not by chaos, not by rebellion, but by its own rules. And it failed to explain itself. The most revealing part wasn't who was questioned or even who was criticized. It was who was never truly held accountable. Because the true measure of any institution isn't how aggressively it punishes the powerless. It's how willingly it restrains itself when the spotlight turns inward. And that test, exposed in 90 seconds on live television, remains unanswered. But unanswered questions have a way of echoing far beyond the room where they're asked. Long after the microphones are turned off. Long after the cameras move on. Long after officials issue their carefully worded statements. Those moments linger, quietly reshaping public trust. What viewers witnessed wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a collision between image and reality. Between what institutions promise and what they deliver when pressure arrives. The rules were there. The procedures were clear. The authority was present. And yet accountability somehow remained just out of reach. Not denied outright, not defended directly, just endlessly deferred. This is how systems rarely collapse, not in explosions, but in delays, in committees, in reviews, in promises of future action that never quite arrives. Every generation is told that the safeguards are strong, that oversight works, that justice is impartial. And then moments like this quietly test those claims. No dramatic breakdown, no public confession, just a slow realization that some questions are allowed to be asked, but not allowed to be answered. The people in that room weren't just representing themselves. They were representing institutions built on public faith. And faith, once shaken, is far harder to restore than to protect. Because when accountability becomes optional for those at the top, it stops feeling like justice and starts feeling like theater. A performance where the outcome is already written, where responsibility is carefully redirected, where consequences are endlessly postponed, where transparency exists in appearance but not in practice. And the most dangerous part isn't the silence. It's how normal that silence has become. Moments like this no longer shock the public. They simply confirm what many already suspect, that there are 2 standards operating at once. One, swift and unforgiving. The other, patient, protected, and rarely enforced. This hearing didn't expose corruption with a smoking gun. It exposed something far more unsettling. A system comfortable with avoiding itself. Comfortable with complexity when clarity is needed. Comfortable with process when accountability is required. And comfortable letting time do what answers would not. Because time has a way of dulling outrage, of moving headlines forward, of burying uncomfortable truths beneath new crises. But history has a longer memory than the news cycle. And when it looks back on moments like this, it won't ask who spoke the loudest. It will ask who had the power to act and chose not to. It will ask why the rules applied so easily in one direction but became complicated in another. And it will recognize this hearing not as a turning point, but as another warning that went politely ignored. Not a failure of individuals alone, but of a structure designed to protect itself first. Because when institutions stop policing their own power, they don't just weaken. They teach the public a dangerous lesson: that accountability is negotiable, that responsibility depends on rank, and that justice, when aimed upward, moves slower, if it moves at all. And that is how trust erodes. Not in scandals, not in riots, but in quiet moments where the truth is close enough to touch and still allowed to slip away.